Hello, my name is Hannah Patton, and for my term presentation project, I am doing French. Just a quick introduction and background to French as a language. French, just like English, is incredibly rich in its history. Just as English is taught and spoken in many countries for business and world affairs, French is just as important. This language can be traced back all the way to the Roman Empire and is a primary language, obviously in France, but also in French territories. So in Canada and parts of Africa that are either French territories or colonized by French people, the language is spoken. And then also throughout the world, places in Europe and in the United States speak French. One of the biggest factors that contributed to French speaking in the United States was actually due to the aristocrat tier in education. They thought it was better to know French, and knowing French and English put you higher up on that scale, made you more educated, and made you look better to other people. So people like Thomas Jefferson, for example, were big advocates of the French language. So in today's presentation, I will be talking about 3 different aspects of French and linguistics of French. First will be morphology, then we will go into syntax, and lastly we will discuss phonetics. To start off, I wanted to go into morphology. This is probably one of the biggest differences seen between English and French because it's how the words are formed. So in French, it's very similar to Spanish, Italian, and other languages, especially in the idea that their verbs are inflected to reflect the subject and the tense. The practice is called conjugation. An example of this would be in English, a person might say, "We were eating." However, in French, a person would merely have to say, "mangions," to express the same meaning as the English phrase. The biggest and most significant difference in this is while we are declaring who, when, and what in 3 different words, French is using all of that information and altering the verb to express all that in one word. So, while the stem word in French would be manger, or to eat, by conjugating the verb and adding the suffix ions, it changes the word to first person plural, imperfect indicative. While the use of inflected verbs is very helpful in French and other languages that use this practice, it's also pretty challenging if your primary language is English, because in English the verb typically doesn't change unless you are adding a simple suffix such as s, ing, ed, etc. to change the tense of it. So having all of these different additives to the word, it can make it a lot more challenging for a person learning the rules and the irregulars that go along with it. Moving on to syntax, French is actually very similar to English in this aspect because French, like English, is made up of 2 parts, the subject and the predicate. Similarly, in both languages, the subject tells the listener who the sentence is about, while the predicate is telling who or what the subject is doing. Both of these languages also follow the same sentence structure, so subject, verb, object. For example, a cohesive and understandable sentence in English would be "she fed the dog." In French, the same sentence would be "elle a nourri le chien." In both of these sentences, the subject comes first, being she or elle. This is then followed by the verb, which is fed or a nourri. and then the sentence ends with the object, the dog, le chien. Another similarity within syntax between English and French is that neither can change the position of the subject using the sentence that I used before. If you were to change the subject and the object's position within the sentence, it would read, the dog fed she, which doesn't make any sense in English, and even more so doesn't make any sense in French. And in French, it would read, le chien la nourrit. And like I said, it just sounds very Yoda-like. It doesn't really make a clear, cohesive sentence, and it's using the incorrect pronoun to represent she. If the sentence even made sense, it would be the dog fed her, but the dog is now taking the action, whereas she was originally taking the action. Another similarity in the category of syntax that French and English share are that French also have different phrases like English. So they have a noun phrase, they have an adverb phrase, adjective phrase, verb phrase, and prepositional phrase. For example, noun phrases can include determiners, adjectives, and obviously nouns. An example of a noun phrase in English would be the playful puppy. In French, the noun phrase is le chat ludique. The biggest difference between the English noun phrase and the French noun phrase is the adjective in the French noun phrase comes after the noun. This is one difference between the two languages when dealing with syntax, where the rule of thumb is that typically an adjective will directly follow a noun. There are a few adjectives, or a group of them, that will go before the noun, but typically they go after. While this is one variation, typically these kinds of phrases are very similar to what we see in English, with only a few irregularities. An example of a prep phrase in English would be in the park, and in French, the prep phrase is a direct translation and says dans le parc. Like I said, a direct translation is seen here. There is no change in the sentence arrangement, and there are no irregularities to the English version. The last category of linguistics I want to talk about with French is phonetics. This is another area worth comparing and contrasting when looking at French and English, because while there are a lot of similarities, there are some differences between sounds. Just a few examples of differences between the two languages. A native English speaker might listen to a native French speaker and make the comment that they sound like they're singing. In French, they use liaisons to connect words, and they also don't put a lot of stress on different parts of words depending on their words. They are pretty straightforward, and if they do put stress, it's on the last syllable of a word, so it can sound very sing-songy. Whereas in English, our words are less articulate with our mouth and facial structure. So to French native speakers, English speakers might sound lazy, or that they're not articulating their words enough for their liking or for what they're used to. While there are aspects of each language that are very distinct and different, there are also a lot of similarities. For example, in English, there are about 44 different sounds that the language uses. However, in French, there is only 37, but there are a few new ones that English is unfamiliar with. However, most of the sounds are very similar, or the exact same sounds that English uses. In the presentation, you can see that I have 3 different sounds. These sounds are used in French, but are not familiar to English speakers. Because of that, I am not going to try to pronounce them because they're extremely difficult for me to pronounce. However, the way that the tongue sits in the mouth and helps make these sounds are displayed underneath the IPA symbol that represents these sounds. Overall, French is a super fascinating language, especially when comparing it to English. While there are many similarities, there are also a lot of differences. When studying morphology, syntax, phonetics, and more, it makes the language easier to understand rather than just learning translations. Personally, I would love to learn more about French and even learn how to speak it. I actually plan on moving to Paris for a few months for a mission trip, pandemic willing. I would love to be able to speak French with the people there and just know more about the language in general. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation. I hope you really enjoyed it and have a good break.